Senator Kyrsten Sinema has finally weighed in on Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer's deal. It's a proposed legislation that is likely to go through many changes. Some progressives are celebrating it as legendary action to respond to climate change. Others are more skeptical. I fall under that category. The proposed legislation, as it stands today, includes incredibly modest tax hikes. Things like closing the carried interest loophole. Carried interest, something that overwhelmingly benefits hedge fund managers and private equity goons. It would do something about those loopholes to ensure that these individuals get taxed similar to how ordinary people working for wages, working for salaries get taxed. Again, incredibly modest because it only impacts like a tiny portion of really wealthy people. It includes some negotiations on pharmaceutical drugs, but not all pharmaceutical drugs, okay? And it also includes some money that would be appropriated for investment into renewable energies. But there's also a huge problem in that it provides all sorts of goodies for fossil fuel companies, which I've been talking about. I'm gonna talk about that further. But what is Sinema upset about? What is she raising a red flag on when it comes to this legislation? She doesn't want to raise taxes on the rich. The number one thing she's brought up, according to Manu Raju over at CNN, is the closing of the carried interest loophole. Because we all know who her donors are. We all know who she sold out to, even though she ran as this fire-breathing progressive. Nah, she got a little tasty taste of that cash. She loves that cash. So she's got to do right by the small group of billionaires who are upset over the thought of having to pay their fair share in taxes by closing the carried interest loophole. So my prediction, along with the prediction of other incredibly smart individuals who aren't brain dead and have been paying attention to politics, is that the final bill, after it goes through the process of debates and negotiations, will probably strip out many of the good provisions that progressives are trying to celebrate today. I have no doubt that that is what the end result will be. It's going to be similar to what happened to Biden's infrastructure plan, which, by the way, started off as one massive piece of legislation that included both social spending and also funding for physical infrastructure. Biden decided, curiously enough, to split that up into two bills, ensuring that the corporate handout part of his proposal would pass easily, and the social spending would be completely decimated, cut out entirely. No universal pre-K, no permanent child tax credit, no free community and public college. I mean, the list goes on and on. No funding for elder care, no help with child care. All of those social spending provisions got cut out of the final piece of legislation. And that is exactly what's gonna happen with whatever you might think we should be celebrating today with this deal that was struck between Manchin and Chuck Schumer. So let's talk a little bit more about what this means for the climate activists who are excited, and they should be excited, that there's finally some money being dedicated to, if this passes, the climate emergency. Well, there are other elements to this that I think are being underreported, and I want to share it with you because the real question is, will the bad outweigh the good? Will the positive climate provisions be outweighed or mitigated by the negative pro-fossil fuel provisions? I'm just gonna give you the details as reported by Common Dreams and Bloomberg Law. Bloomberg, not a leftist organization, Bloomberg Law, okay? You can decide for yourselves. Okay, maybe I'm being too harsh on Democrats, who knows, we'll see. The legislation whose scope and ambitions were dictated by fossil fuel industry ally, Senator Joe Manchin, includes components that are helpful to our business. Rich Walsh of Valero, a fossil fuel company, said during the fossil fuel giant's earnings call on Thursday, referring to tax credits in the 725-page bill that could benefit the company. Homeboy is real excited. He's like, ooh, tax goodies, we're getting more. That doesn't sound like the appropriate response to a climate emergency, but let me continue. The bill, if passed, would tie wind and solar development to oil and gas lease sales. That language is expected to undermine the Biden administration's plans to expand renewable energy on federal lands and waters, as well as greatly complicate plans to draw down oil and gas production that contributes directly to the climate crisis. Oh, but there's more. Okay, so how would this work? Now, look, Manchin, as we all know, financially benefits from the fossil fuel industry. He loves it. He would never sacrifice that, and he's made that very clear. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that in order to get Manchin to play ball, without, by the way, using any sticks, because God forbid Democratic leadership ever go after Joe Manchin with sticks. All he gets is carrots. I mean, you got Bugs Bunny running the Senate, running the country. All he gets is carrots, okay? They'll never attack him, but they'll keep giving him carrots with the hope that maybe, just maybe, they can pass this dismantled, decimated piece of legislation that ends up benefiting fossil fuel companies more than our, environment. But let me continue. The proposed legislation would block the Interior Department from issuing any wind and solar developments right of way unless it first holds oil and gas lease sales. Onshore, the department would have to offer 2 million acres of federal land for lease annually. Let's pause right there. Do you guys understand that? 2 million acres of federal land annually. Federal land, meaning it belongs to the federal government, meaning it belongs to us, we the people. But we won't be benefiting from that federal land. In fact, that federal land will not be utilized for abortion access for women who end up, being denied that care because they live in a red state. Biden administration said, no, we can't do that. We can't offer abortions on federal land. But what we can do with our federal land is offer fossil fuel companies the opportunity to rape and pillage that land for their own personal profit to the detriment of all of us, to the detriment of our environment. Okay, great, but let me continue with that graphic. The department would have to offer 2 million acres of federal land for lease annually, or half of all the land nominated for leasing, and hold a lease sale within 120 days of issuing any renewables right of way. Do you guys understand what that means? That means if we're gonna do anything that helps out companies that are focusing their energy on wind and solar, we have to ensure that we give fossil fuel companies all these goodies before renewable energy companies get any help from us. That is what that means. Let me continue. Offshore, that was just onshore. Let's talk about offshore. Offshore, the department would have to offer at least 60 million acres of federal waters in an oil and gas lease sale in the year prior to leasing any waters for offshore wind development. You guys get the point here? And by the way, this is how the bill is written today. It is likely to get worse after people like Kyrsten Sinema are through with it. Let me continue though. So you have an individual who serves as the president of the Western Energy Alliance, okay? Her name's Kathleen. She got some wind of this deal between Manchin and Schumer, and she's real excited, okay? She represents major fossil fuel companies. Here's what she says. This provision was quite a pleasant surprise, said Kathleen Gama, president of the Western Energy Alliance, which represents oil and gas producers operating on federal lands. The alliance sued the Biden administration to force it to proceed with quarterly onshore lease sales. The bill forces them not to neglect oil and natural gas. And so you might be wondering, well, all right, but why would Manchin care about oil and natural gas? Like, does he really profit from any of that? Doesn't he just profit from coal? But now you're right, he does profit from coal to the tune of $500,000 a year from his personal investments in a coal company known as Enersystems. We've done extensive reporting on that. But he also has a vested interest in oil and gas. And I'll give you a specific example right now. The bill would attempt to clear the way for the approval of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which would transport Appalachian shale gas about 300 miles from West Virginia to Virginia. This pipeline is a key priority of Manchin's. In fact, Manchin has made clear that he views approving the Mountain Valley Pipeline as a top priority. Gee, I wonder if he could maybe have some donors involved with that project. Maybe that's why it's a bit of a priority for him. Supporters have characterized it as a way to help make the United States an exporter. An exporter. Let me repeat that one more time. An exporter of liquefied natural gas, which the United States is sending to Europe amid the war in Ukraine. So when you hear all of these pleasant little stories about why we need to expand drilling for gas and oil in the United States to make us energy independent, just understand that that's BS. Because these natural resources, these fossil fuels, don't belong to us, right? They belong to these fossil fuel companies who are looking to sell to the highest bidder. So yeah, of course they're looking to export. In fact, as it stands today, even before this bill passes, even before Democrats, let me repeat, Democrats assist in expanding drilling for gas and natural oil. For oil and natural gas, understand that we're already the top oil and natural gas producer. We're also the top exporter of oil and natural gas. So the idea that, no, we have to do this because Americans are suffering. Americans are suffering and we don't want to fall prey to all these petrostates. No, we love falling prey to petrostates. Are you kidding me? That's the reason why you have Joe Biden constantly kissing Saudi Arabia's ass. And it's not gonna stop. The reliance on fossil fuels will continue as long as fossil fuel companies get to engage in unlimited campaign donations, unlimited legalized bribery. They run the country. So the idea that we can get incredible change through legislation when the foundation of this system is rotten to the core is laughable. You don't have to be a genius. Okay, people think that I'm just like, I'm anti-Democrat and I'm like somehow pro-Republican. I despise Republicans. And when I say Republicans, I'm not talking about the voters. I'm talking about Republican lawmakers. They are a lost cause. They've been bought off for a long, long time. My problem is that increasingly Democrats look more and more like the Republican Party. Their foreign policy is reminiscent of what we got during George Bush's administration in the early 2000s. Their love for the fossil fuel industry is pretty clear here. And the idea that we should be celebrating this as it stands today, when it's already a pretty terrible bill, I think says a lot about what the media's priority is, because there's a lot of pressure from the media to be celebratory in response to this. But keep in mind, this is before it's further watered down of some of the decent provisions. Now, climate groups have been fighting the project that Joe Manchin is super excited about. They've opposed the project with a 2017 analysis by Oil Change International, an advocacy group, finding that the greenhouse gas emissions from the Mountain Valley Pipeline would approximate 26 coal plants or 19 million passenger cars. That's great, that's great. And you know who's doing some positive advertising to entice Senator Sinema to vote against the bill, but more importantly, to vote against the provisions that would increase taxes on the rich. The Koch brother funded Americans for Prosperity. They put this ad out. Let's take a quick look at that. have a plan to fix it. And then they go after this bill and they just try to get Senator Sinema to stop it. But I want to be clear. I want to be clear about what they want Sinema to stop exactly. Because they're not talking about the provisions that are favorable to the fossil fuel companies. They're specifically talking about the taxes, because you go to the YouTube version of that ad, and that is what is written right there plainly in the description box. No new taxes. And guess what? Today, Senator Sinema made it clear, not a big fan of closing the carried interest loophole. So it's a prediction, I could be wrong, but I would venture to say and predict that they will do away with those incredibly modest tax increases that only impact the rich. And they'll sell us pretty little stories about how they had to do away with it because they were worried about increasing taxes on ordinary working Americans, even though those provisions do not increase taxes on ordinary Americans. We've been through this a billion times before. And there's no amount of shaming that can come from the likes of washed up comedians like Hal Sparks that can convince me that this bill that provides massive handouts to fossil fuel companies and is likely to be stripped down of all its good provisions is a good idea. Especially when we take a good hard look at what was promised to Democratic voters in the very beginning of all of this. All sorts of social spending programs that would have materially improved the lives of countless Americans. All of that stuff is gone. It's not even up for discussion anymore, and we're supposed to celebrate. I'm sorry that I have higher standards for the Democratic Party. I apologize for that. I was under the impression, through the campaign messaging that we got from them, that they were actually gonna look out for the needs of American workers, that they were gonna make Americans whole, that they were gonna do something about wealth and income inequality in this country, that they were gonna offer assistance to women who wanna get back to work, but they can't because they can't afford childcare, that they were gonna fight to ensure that Medicare can do something that they obviously should be able to do, which is negotiate for lower drug prices. But it turns out that they never were serious about any of that. They never fought for those things. And the first thing they did was point to all the convenient excuses that they had baked in to this disgusting, corrupt system. You can't complain about, well, these conservative Democrats, what can we do? Stop endorsing them. Stop sending your establishments money to their campaigns. There are ways to play hardball. But I think it's telling when Democrats refuse to do it. So if I'm the bad guy for being critical toward this weak sauce garbage that we keep getting sold by the Democratic Party, apologies. If it offends anyone in the audience that I'm not telling you pretty little tales about how wonderful this is, go watch Hal Sparks' show, seriously. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. This ain't the show for you. Not gonna tell you lies. Not interested in that. I could be making a lot more money doing just that. But I decided to basically give that the cold shoulder to be able to do my job here and tell you the truth about what this legislation and other legislation actually entails. So I know it's a cold, hard world, isn't it? Sometimes we want to be told cute little stories, but you're just not gonna get that here. We deserve better. Certainly the people who went out there and canvassed and worked hard to get these Democrats elected, they deserve better. That's it, end of story.